August 15, 1944. Somewhere over the English countryside, Lieutenant Colonel James Ace Morrison poses confidently beside his P-51 Mustang fighter plane. Or so it seemed, just another heroic American pilot during World War II. Part of Morrison's war memorabilia collection, the photograph was donated to the National Air and Space Museum in 2022. But when digital restoration experts enhanced this seemingly ordinary pilot's photo, they discovered something in the cockpit behind him that made their blood run cold. One of the most shocking betrayals in aviation history was revealed by a detail so disturbing. How America's most decorated fighter ace had been living a lie that cost hundreds of Allied lives would be exposed by what they found. Right now, hit that subscribe button, because everything you thought you knew about World War II heroes will be shattered by what we're about to reveal. On a Tuesday night in September 2022, the phone call came to Dr. Catherine Reynolds at 11:47 p.m. Late-night calls about historical discoveries were something she was used to as the chief aviation historian at the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum. But her colleague's voice made her instantly alert. Dr. Michael Chang said, his voice tight with stress, "Catherine, you need to get down here immediately. I've been working on the Morrison collection, and I've found something. Well, you need to see this for yourself." For weeks, Dr. Reynolds had been expecting this call. With great fanfare, the James Morrison collection had arrived at the museum. Donated by his grandson, after the family estate was finally settled, it contained the personal effects of one of World War II's most celebrated fighter pilots. With 23 aerial victories over Europe credited to him, Morrison stood as one of the top American aces of the war. 20 minutes later, in the museum's digital restoration laboratory, Reynolds stood staring at a photograph that would change everything she thought she knew about wartime heroism. Beside his distinctive P-51 Mustang fighter, nicknamed Liberty's Sword, Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison was shown in his flight suit at a British airfield during the height of the Allied air campaign over Nazi-occupied Europe. It appeared to have been taken, dated August 15, 1944, from a wartime aviation photograph. At first glance, it was exactly what you'd expect. The kind of image that had inspired a generation of young men to volunteer for the Army Air Forces showed a confident American pilot posing with his aircraft. Easy and natural was Morrison's smile, his posture relaxed but alert, embodying the cocky confidence that had made American fighter pilots legendary. But for the past 3 days, Dr. Chang had subjected the photograph to the most advanced digital enhancement techniques available. The same technology used by the FBI for forensic analysis. Details invisible to the naked eye for nearly 80 years had begun to emerge as the image was processed at ultra-high resolution. Pointing to Morrison's aircraft in the background, Chang said, "Look at the cockpit. Look at what's mounted on his instrument panel." With growing confusion, Reynolds leaned closer to the computer screen, studying the enhanced image. What appeared to be a small camera mounted directly behind the gun sight was clearly visible in the cockpit of Morrison's P-51. Positioned to record everything the pilot could see during combat, the camera was pointing forward. "That's unusual," Reynolds said slowly. Gun cameras weren't standard equipment on P-51s until late 1944, and this photo is from August. But more importantly, look at the angle. This isn't a standard gun camera. It's positioned to record the pilot's actions, not his targets. Grimly, Chang nodded. "That's what I thought too, but keep looking." Enhance Section 7 Alpha. Reynolds felt her breath catch in her throat as the computer processed the specified section of the photograph. Almost hidden by the cockpit's shadows and mounted beneath the camera was a small radio transmitter with an antenna configuration she recognized from her years studying wartime communication equipment. It was a German radio transmitter. "Michael," she whispered, "are you absolutely certain about this enhancement? The implications of what we're looking at?" "I've run it through 3 different systems," Chang replied. "The equipment is definitely there, and the serial numbers visible on the radio match German Luftwaffe communication devices from 1943 and 1944. But there's more." Another section of the enhanced photograph was pulled up by him. This one showing the interior of Morrison's flight jacket. A small piece of paper tucked into his jacket pocket was barely visible, but clear enough to read under digital magnification. What appeared to be a list of numbers and coordinates written in German were contained on the paper. Sinking into a chair, Reynolds felt her mind racing through the implications. Then James Morrison, America's celebrated fighter ace, winner of the Distinguished Flying Cross and Silver Star, had been equipped with German communication equipment and carrying German documents while flying combat missions over occupied Europe. If this evidence was accurate. Quietly, Chang said, "Catherine, I don't think Morrison was fighting the Germans. I think he was working for them." But even more disturbing than either historian could have imagined would prove to be the truth about Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison. In Detroit, Michigan, James Morrison was born in 1918, the son of a wealthy automotive engineer who had made his fortune designing engines for Henry Ford. From an early age, young James had been fascinated by aviation, spending his weekends at local airfields and dreaming of becoming a pilot while growing up in the shadow of America's industrial might. His exceptional natural ability was what made Morrison different from other aviation enthusiasts. A feat that impressed even veteran pilots was that he had learned to fly at 16, soloing after just 4 hours of instruction. By the time he graduated from the University of Michigan in 1940 with a degree in mechanical engineering, he was already recognized as one of the most gifted pilots in the Midwest. But Morrison's path to becoming a fighter pilot hadn't followed the typical route of American war heroes. A troubling pattern of connections that had somehow escaped the attention of military intelligence was revealed by Dr. Reynolds' investigation into Morrison's pre-war activities. In 1939, as part of a student exchange program studying advanced aviation technology, Morrison had traveled to Germany. Officially researching aircraft engine design, he had spent 6 months at the University of Berlin. Quite different was what Morrison had actually been doing in Berlin. Recently released under a Freedom of Information Act request, declassified State Department files showed that Morrison had made contact with high-ranking officials in the German Air Ministry during his stay. Considerable admiration for German aviation achievements and organizational efficiency had been expressed by him, according to one diplomatic cable, after he had toured Luftwaffe facilities and met with German aircraft designers. Even more disturbing were the financial records Dr. Reynolds discovered in Morrison's personal papers. From something called the International Aviation Research Foundation, beginning in January 1940, just weeks after his return from Germany, Morrison had been receiving regular payments that continued right up until his enlistment in the Army Air Forces in December 1941. According to FBI files from the 1950s, the International Aviation Research Foundation had been a front organization operated by German intelligence to recruit assets within the American aviation industry. When Morrison enlisted in the Army Air Forces after Pearl Harbor, his exceptional flying skills and apparent patriotic enthusiasm made him an ideal candidate for fighter pilot training. In every phase of instruction he excelled, displaying an almost supernatural ability to anticipate enemy tactics and maneuvers. To natural talent and intensive study of German fighter tactics, his commanding officers attributed this. That Morrison's knowledge came from first-hand briefings he had received in Berlin, they had no idea. In early 1943, Morrison's combat record began in earnest when he was assigned to the 357th Fighter Group, based in England. Over the English Channel, his first aerial victory came on March 15, 1943, when he shot down a German Messerschmitt Bf 109, one of the most successful American pilots in Europe. He had been credited with 12 victories within 6 months. But suspicious patterns that had gone unnoticed for nearly 80 years were revealed by a careful analysis of Morrison's combat. Reports conducted by Dr. Reynolds and a team of military historians. During specific types of missions, Morrison's victories consistently occurred, bomber escort flights where his actions could be observed and verified by multiple witnesses. However, during fighter sweeps and reconnaissance missions, where he operated with less oversight, Morrison frequently reported mechanical problems that forced him to abort his missions early or separate from his formation. More significantly, statistical analysis showed that Morrison's presence on bomber escort missions correlated with higher than average losses among the bombers he was supposed to be protecting. Bomber losses that were 40% higher than the squadron average resulted from missions where Morrison served as escort leader to increased German fighter resistance and improving enemy tactics. At the time these losses were attributed, that the losses might be the result of intelligence being passed to the Germans about American flight routes, timing, and defensive capabilities. No one suspected, but through evidence hidden in the very photographs meant to celebrate his heroism, Morrison's real mission in the skies over Europe was about to become clear. More than just Morrison's image had been captured by the enhanced photograph from August 15, 1944. The sophisticated intelligence operation he had been conducting from the cockpit of his P-51 Mustang had been documented by it. But to understand the full scope of his betrayal, Dr. Reynolds needed to examine the other photographs in the Morrison collection. With Dr. Chang and a team of digital forensics experts, she began a systematic enhancement of every photograph in Morrison's wartime collection. A treasure trove of evidence that had been hiding in plain sight for nearly 8 decades was what they discovered. At various air bases throughout England, the photographs showed Morrison's aircraft, and digital enhancement revealed that the German radio equipment visible in the August photograph had been present in his cockpit for months, possibly years. But more disturbing were the details that emerged when they enhanced images of Morrison himself. In a photograph dated June 3, 1944, just 3 days before D-Day, enhancement revealed that Morrison was wearing what appeared to be a German military watch beneath his flight suit sleeve. A Longines aviator's timepiece, standard issue for Luftwaffe pilots, but unavailable to Allied personnel through any legitimate means, was the watch. But the most damning evidence of Morrison's treachery was provided by a photograph taken on July 20, 1944. Returning from what his mission report described as a successful fighter sweep over northern France. The image showed Morrison, with apparent exhaustion and adrenaline, his face flushed. He was climbing out of his cockpit. To anyone viewing the photograph in 1944, the image of a hero returning from combat is what it would have looked like. But a very different story was told by details revealed through digital enhancement. No signs of having engaged in aerial combat were shown by Morrison's aircraft. No carbon scoring on his gun ports, no empty shell casings around his aircraft, and most significantly, visible through the cockpit canopy, his ammunition counters showed that he had returned with a full load of ammunition. Even more disturbing was what the enhancement revealed about Morrison's physical condition. Rather than showing the stress and fatigue typical of pilots returning from combat, Morrison appeared relaxed and well rested. Immaculate was his flight suit, perfectly groomed was his hair, and his expression was one of satisfaction rather than the 1,000-yard stare common among combat veterans. But when Dr. Reynolds enhanced the background of the July 20th photograph, the most shocking discovery came. Barely visible in the original image, behind Morrison's aircraft, was another P-51 Mustang bearing different markings than standard U.S. Army Air Force's identification. The distinctive yellowy nose markings and black crosses of the German Luftwaffe were carried by the aircraft in the background, but it was painted to look like an American fighter at first glance. Only under digital enhancement were the subtle differences visible. The slightly different shade of olive drab paint, the positioning of the national insignia, and most tellingly, the small German identification numbers painted in a location where they would normally be invisible to casual observation. One of the most audacious deception operations of World War II was what Dr. Reynolds realized she was looking at evidence of. Against the Germans, Morrison hadn't been flying combat missions. While maintaining his cover as an American fighter ace, he had been flying with them, using a captured or specially modified P-51 to operate behind Allied lines. The implications were staggering. While maintaining his position as a respected American pilot, if Morrison had been operating a German-controlled aircraft, he would have had access to the most sensitive Allied intelligence flight routes, bombing targets, defensive capabilities, and operational timing. But beyond simple intelligence gathering went Morrison's betrayal. That he had been present during some of the most devastating Allied losses of the war was revealed by analysis of his flight logs, including the disastrous bomber raid on Schweinfurt in October 1943 and the massive Allied casualties during the bombing of Berlin in March 1944. That Morrison hadn't just been reporting Allied plans to the Germans was what the evidence suggested. While maintaining his cover as a war hero, he had been actively participating in operations designed to maximize Allied casualties. Dr. Reynolds knew that more than enhanced photographs and suspicious timing was required for accusations of treason against a decorated war hero. The human cost of Morrison's betrayal was what she needed to understand, and that meant examining the missions where his presence had coincided with unusually high Allied casualties. With military historians at the Air Force Historical Research Agency, she began a comprehensive analysis of bomber missions where Morrison had served as escort leader between 1943 and 1944. A pattern of tragedy that had been attributed to German tactical improvements, but was actually the result of deliberate sabotage, was what she discovered. The first case study involved the mission of October 14, 1943, a bombing raid against the Ball bearing factories in Schweinfurt, Germany. For one section of the bomber formation, Morrison had been assigned as escort leader, responsible for protecting 12 B-17 flying fortresses and their crews. That Morrison section had encountered unexpectedly heavy German fighter resistance, resulting in the loss of 8 of the 12 bombers under his protection, was stated in the official mission report. For his apparent heroism in the face of overwhelming odds, Morrison himself was credited with shooting down 2 German fighters during the engagement, earning him a Distinguished Flying Cross. But in Morrison's account of the battle, disturbing discrepancies were revealed by Dr. Reynolds's analysis. With uncanny precision, according to the surviving bomber crews from Morrison's section, the German fighters had appeared, targeting the most vulnerable aircraft in the formation with coordinated attacks that suggested detailed advanced knowledge of the bombers, defensive capabilities, and crew positions. A report immediately after the mission had been filed by Staff Sergeant William Mueller, a tail gunner on one of the surviving B-17s, expressing concern about Morrison's behavior during the attack. Buried in classified files for 70 years, Mueller's account painted a very different picture of Morrison's actions that day. The escort leader seemed to know exactly when and where the German fighters would attack. Mueller had written, "Instead of positioning our escorts to provide maximum defensive coverage, he kept pulling the P-51s away from the formation at critical moments, claiming to be pursuing German fighters that the rest of us couldn't see." Most disturbing was what happened when the main German attack began. Morrison's aircraft was perfectly positioned to intercept the first wave of enemy fighters. But instead he turned away from the threat, claiming radio problems. The German fighters were able to attack our bombers without interference for over 3 minutes before the other escorts could respond. A 78 American airmen died during the Schweinfurt mission. Their bodies were never recovered. Their families told only that they had died heroically in service to their country, that their deaths had been orchestrated by one of their own protectors. None of them knew. Throughout Morrison's combat tour, the pattern repeated itself. From formations under Morrison's protection, the loss of 15 bombers resulted from the mission to Berlin on March 6, 1944. 23 American aircraft and 230 crew members were the cost of the raid on Augsburg on April 13, 1944. Heroic action against overwhelming German resistance was described in Morrison's official reports in each case. For decorations, he was credited with multiple aerial victories and recommended in each case. And in each case, behavior that suggested Morrison had advanced knowledge of German attack plans and had positioned himself to avoid genuine combat while ensuring maximum damage to the bombers he was supposed to protect, was described by the actual survivors. But the most heartbreaking case involved the mission of May 28, 1944, just 9 days before D-Day. A formation of B-24 liberators attacking German transportation targets in preparation for the Normandy invasion was what Morrison had been assigned to escort. With minimal German fighter activity expected, the mission was considered routine. Instead, what the official report described as the most concentrated German fighter attack of the war was encountered by the bombers. 18 B-24s were shot down, taking with them 180 American airmen. The younger brother of the Pearl Harbor survivor, who had tried to expose Nazi sabotage in 1941, was among the dead. Second Lieutenant Robert Hayes. Believing he was protected by America's greatest fighter ace, Robert Hayes died, that his death had been orchestrated by the man he trusted to bring him home safely, never knowing that Morrison was operating as a German asset had been established by Dr. Reynolds's investigation. But how such an operation was coordinated and controlled was what she still needed to understand. From an unexpected source came the answer: the personal diary of Oberleutnant Klaus Richter, a Luftwaffe intelligence officer whose papers had been captured by Soviet forces in 1945 and only recently made available to Western researchers. A first-hand account of one of Nazi Germany's most successful intelligence operations was provided by Richter's diary, written in a mixture of German and English from 1943 to 1944. The entries dating revealed the sophisticated network that had enabled Morrison to operate as a double agent while maintaining his cover as an American war hero. Adlerflug, Eagle Flight, was the operation code named, designed to place German assets within Allied fighter squadrons where they could provide real-time intelligence about bomber formations, flight routes, and defensive tactics. The crown jewel of this program had been Morrison, an American pilot whose exceptional combat record provided perfect cover for his intelligence activities. Through a complex system of coded radio transmissions disguised as routine military communications. According to Richter's diary, Morrison received his instructions. For receiving intelligence, The German radio equipment visible in Morrison's cockpit wasn't just for transmitting real-time tactical information to Luftwaffe interceptors, it was. 15th August 1944, Richter wrote, "Received excellent intelligence from Adler I regarding tomorrow's bombing mission to Stuttgart. Target information, approach routes, escort strength, and timing all confirmed. Have positioned fighter squadrons accordingly. Estimate 20 to 25 enemy bombers will be destroyed with minimal German losses." Within the German intelligence network, Adler I was Morrison's code designation. That Morrison's victories against German aircraft had been carefully orchestrated theater was revealed by the diary entries. By expendable pilots, the German fighters he claimed to have shot down were either obsolete aircraft flown, or were aircraft that had suffered genuine mechanical failures, to provide Morrison with credible victory claims. In some cases, German pilots had been ordered to eject from undamaged aircraft, but concerning Morrison's activities on D-Day itself was Richter's most damning revelation. June 6, 1944, Richter wrote, "Adler I provided crucial intelligence about Allied air support for the Normandy invasion. While we cannot prevent the landing itself, his information has allowed us to position our fighter reserves to maximize damage to Allied air operations. The Americans trust him completely. They have assigned him to lead fighter sweeps over the invasion beaches on D-Day for protecting Allied ground attack aircraft as they supported the troops landing on Omaha and Utah beaches. Morrison had been responsible. The highest rate of aircraft losses during the invasion was experienced by his sector, with 12 Allied fighters shot down in areas where Morrison was providing top cover to unexpectedly strong German air resistance. The official reports credited these losses. That Morrison had been providing the Germans with exact timing and positioning information for every Allied air operation in his sector was the reality. But something even more audacious had been planned by Morrison's handlers, as revealed by Richter's diary. Beginning in late 1944, they intended to use Morrison's growing reputation and influence to affect Allied strategic planning at the highest levels. November 1944, Richter wrote, "Adler I will soon be promoted to squadron command. His war record and reputation make him ideally positioned to influence Allied air strategy for 1945. The High Command is particularly interested in intelligence about Allied plans for bombing German jet aircraft production facilities." Germany's last hope for regaining air superiority over Europe was represented by the jet aircraft program. The Germans might be able to protect their most critical installations while allowing less important facilities to be bombed, maintaining their cover story while preserving their technological advantage. If Morrison could provide intelligence about Allied targeting priorities. But dated December 15, 1944, Richter's final entry revealed that something had gone wrong with the operation. Lost contact with Adler I as of December 12th. His last transmission indicated possible security concerns. Fear the operation may be compromised. You on December 12, 1944. Just as Allied intelligence was beginning to suspect that they had a traitor in their ranks, Morrison had vanished from his base in England. Cold and foggy over RAF Leiston, the English air base where Morrison's 357th Fighter Group was stationed, dawned December 12, 1944, for what was described as a routine reconnaissance flight over the North Sea. According to official records, Lieutenant Colonel Morrison had taken off at 00:60 hours. He never returned. No trace of Morrison or his aircraft was found by the initial search and rescue operation. In waters too deep for recovery, he had likely suffered mechanical failure over the North Sea and crashed, concluded the official report. When no evidence of his survival was found, Morrison was listed as missing in action and later declared killed in action. But far from routine had been Morrison's disappearance. as revealed by Dr. Reynolds's investigation. That Allied counter-intelligence had been investigating suspicious patterns in Luftwaffe fighter tactics throughout the fall of 1944 was shown by classified intelligence reports from December 1944, recently declassified by the CIA. Uncanny knowledge of Allied bomber formations, flight routes, and defensive capabilities was being displayed by German interceptors, suggesting they had access to high-level intelligence sources. Code, named Broken Wing, the investigation had identified several potential security breaches within Allied air operations. On a list of personnel with access to sensitive information who were to be subjected to enhanced security screening appeared Morrison's name. But just 2 days before his scheduled interview with counter-intelligence officers, Morrison had disappeared. Even more suspicious became the circumstances of his disappearance when Dr. Reynolds examined the maintenance records for Morrison's aircraft. Just 3 days earlier, extensive modifications had been undergone by the P-51 Mustang he had flown on his final mission. For reconnaissance flights, modifications that were not standard. According to the maintenance logs, additional fuel tanks that would have extended its range to over 200 miles had been fitted to Morrison's aircraft. For a routine reconnaissance mission over the North Sea, this was far more fuel capacity than needed. But to reach neutral territory in Sweden or Switzerland, it would have been sufficient. More significantly, specialized navigation equipment, including a German-manufactured radio compass that would have allowed precise navigation to pre-planned coordinates, had been equipped to the aircraft. On Morrison's personal authority, bypassing normal approval procedures, this equipment had been installed. But from Morrison's personal effects came the most telling evidence, which had been packed and shipped to his family in Detroit, just hours before his final flight. That Morrison had liquidated his personal bank accounts and transferred the funds to a Swiss account in the days leading up to his disappearance was discovered by Dr. Reynolds. A series of letters to family members and friends had also been mailed by him, until after he was reported missing, letters that weren't delivered. By someone preparing for a permanent disappearance, rather than a routine military mission. The letters examined by handwriting experts in 2022 showed signs of stress and haste, suggesting they had been written. But perhaps the most damning evidence was found in Morrison's quarters after his disappearance. Undeveloped film that showed classified Allied intelligence documents, aircraft recognition charts, and detailed maps of bomber formations and escort patterns was contained in a Leica camera discovered by investigators hidden behind a loose floorboard. Photographs that Morrison had taken during his supposed combat missions were also contained on the film. Images that showed German aircraft and installations from angles and distances that would have been impossible during actual combat engagements. That Morrison had been operating freely in German-controlled airspace, documenting intelligence targets for his handlers. These photographs proved that Morrison had been planning his escape for weeks, possibly months, was concluded by counter-intelligence officers. Timed to occur just as Allied investigators were closing in on his activities. His final mission had been a carefully orchestrated defection to German-controlled territory. But with his disappearance over the North Sea, Morrison's story didn't end. That he had successfully reached German territory and had been welcomed as a valuable defector was suggested by intelligence reports from neutral countries. Reports of an American pilot matching Morrison's description who had arrived in Switzerland in December 1944, claiming to be a defector seeking asylum, were contained in Swiss intelligence files made available to researchers in 2019. Before being transported across the border into Germany, the pilot had been debriefed by German intelligence officers. Complete was Morrison's betrayal of his fellow airmen, but far from over was his story. In May 1945, the end of World War II should have meant the end of James Morrison's story. But well into the Cold War era, America's most notorious fighter-pilot traitor had continued his espionage activities, as revealed by newly declassified CIA files. Too valuable for his German handlers to abandon were his expertise in aviation and his knowledge of American military capabilities. An unexpected turn was taken by Dr. Reynolds' investigation when she received a call from Dr. Sarah Martinez, a historian specializing in Operation Paperclip, the classified American program that brought Nazi scientists and intelligence officers to the United States after the war. References to a Colonel J. Morris, who had been working with former Luftwaffe personnel on advanced jet aircraft development, were discovered by Martinez when she was analyzing recently released documents. Morrison's background perfectly matched the dates, locations, and technical expertise described in the documents. The Americans were so desperate to gain access to German jet technology, Martinez explained during their meeting at the CIA's historical archives, that they were willing to work with almost anyone who could provide useful information. If Morrison had genuine knowledge of both Allied and German aviation capabilities, he would have been incredibly valuable to both sides. That Colonel Morris had been involved in the development of what would become the F-86 Sabre fighter jet, America's primary air superiority fighter during the Korean War, was revealed by the documents. To captured German research, his contributions were officially credited, but the hallmarks of someone with intimate knowledge of both German and American fighter design philosophy were borne by the technical innovations. But far beyond aircraft development extended Morrison's post-war activities. That several former Nazi intelligence officers who had been brought to America under Operation Paperclip maintained contact with a mysterious figure identified only as the American pilot, was shown by FBI surveillance files from the 1950s, obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests. While maintaining operational security for all parties involved, this figure served as a liaison between former German intelligence operatives and certain elements within the American defense establishment, facilitating the exchange of technical information. For everyone concerned, the arrangement was beneficial. Protection and resources to continue their research were gained by the Germans. Access to advanced military technology was gained by the Americans. And within the emerging Cold War intelligence apparatus, a new identity and purpose were gained by Morrison. But where his knowledge of American fighter tactics and capabilities was used to deadly effect against his former countrymen, Morrison's most significant post-war operation involved the Korean War. An American aviation advisor who had provided detailed intelligence about U.S. Air Force operational procedures, aircraft capabilities, and pilot training methods was referenced in classified Chinese military documents captured during the Korean conflict and finally declassified in 2018. The loss of dozens of American aircraft and pilots during the early phases of the war had resulted from tactics developed using this intelligence. A former fighter pilot with extensive combat experience who had chosen to serve the cause of international socialism rather than American imperialism was how the advisor was described. Morrison's background and expertise perfectly matched the technical details and strategic insights attributed to this advisor, while never identified by name in the Chinese documents. Patterns disturbingly similar to those she had identified in Morrison's World War II operations were revealed by Dr. Reynolds' analysis of Korean War air combat statistics, significantly higher than those in other areas of operation where the casualty rates suffered by American fighter formations operating in sectors where the mysterious advisor's intelligence was being applied. But from Soviet archives made available after the end of the Cold War came perhaps the most chilling discovery, that they had been in contact with an American aviation expert code named Eagle, who had been providing intelligence about U.S. military capabilities since the late 1940s, was shown by documents from the KGB's Foreign Intelligence Directorate about American aircraft throughout the Cold War. MiG fighters that would prove devastatingly effective had been contributed to the development of by Eagle, who had been instrumental in helping Soviet aviation designers develop countermeasures to American aircraft, our most valuable long-term asset in American aviation circles. The KGB files described Eagle, someone who has demonstrated unwavering commitment to our cause through decades of faithful service. But its greatest challenge was about to be faced by Morrison's decades-long career as a trader, when a new generation of investigators began asking questions about America's aviation heroes, not in government archives or intelligence agencies, but in a suburban garage in Detroit, Michigan, where Morrison's great-grandson was cleaning out family storage after his grandmother's death in 2021, began the investigation that would finally expose James Morrison's true legacy. About his heroic great-grandfather, the fighter ace who had died serving his country during World War II, 26-year-old Kevin Morrison had grown up hearing family stories as treasured heirlooms, never questioning the official story of his death in action. The family had preserved James Morrison's medals, photographs, and personal effects. But when Kevin discovered a locked metal box hidden beneath decades of family documents, items that didn't match the heroic narrative he had always believed were found by him. German military documents, photographs of Morrison with Luftwaffe officers, and most disturbing of all, a detailed confession letter that Morrison had apparently written, but never sent, describing his activities as a German agent and expressing regret for the American lives his betrayal had cost, were contained in the box that David Sullivan had confronted 40 years earlier. Kevin Morrison faced the same impossible choice: protect his family's honor by concealing the truth, or expose a conspiracy that had remained hidden for nearly 8 decades. Truth was chosen by him. To Dr. Reynolds's investigation had led Kevin's call to the National Air and Space Museum in September 2022, but a much larger inquiry involving multiple government agencies was also triggered by it. The FBI's Cold War Counterintelligence Division, the CIA's Historical Review Group, and the Pentagon's Defense Intelligence Agency all became involved as the scope of Morrison's betrayal became clear. Far beyond his World War II activities had extended Morrison's treachery, as revealed by the investigation. As Colonel J. Morris, using his post-war identity, he had been involved in numerous classified projects throughout the 1950s and 1960s, each providing opportunities to gather intelligence that could be passed to hostile foreign governments. But the development of the U-2 spy plane program had involved Morrison's most significant post-war operation. For Lockheed Aircraft, working as a technical consultant, he had gained access to classified information about the aircraft's capabilities, operational procedures, and planned missions over Soviet territory. Through his KGB handlers, this intelligence had been passed to the Soviet Union, enabling them to develop the surface-to-air missiles that would eventually shoot down Gary Powers's U-2 over Soviet airspace in 1960. Between the United States and Soviet Union, the international incident that resulted from Powers's capture had nearly led to war. That he had been responsible for compromising dozens of classified operations over a period of more than 20 years was concluded by CIA counterintelligence analysts reviewing Morrison's activities. Staggering was the human cost of his betrayal. Due to compromised intelligence, hundreds of American military personnel killed in action, exposed and destroyed numerous covert operations, and systematically undermined American technological advantages. But on other American war heroes was perhaps the most damaging legacy of Morrison's betrayal, the doubt his betrayal cast. How many other heroes might have been working for the enemy? If one of the most celebrated fighter aces of World War II could be a traitor. A comprehensive review of military records from the World War II era, examining the combat records and post-war activities of other highly decorated personnel, was triggered by the investigation. While no evidence of similar large-scale betrayal was found, enormous resources were consumed by the review process, and lasting suspicion within military intelligence circles was created by it. Shockwaves through the military history community were sent by Dr. Reynolds' publication of her findings in 2023. Numerous World War II operations were forced to be re-examined by historians due to the revelation that James Morrison had been a German agent, questioning casualty figures and strategic decisions that had previously been attributed to German tactical superiority. But on the families of the airmen who had died under Morrison's protection was the most profound impact. From descendants of bomber crews who had been killed during missions where his great-grandfather had served as escort leader, Kevin Morrison received hundreds of letters. Only just begun had the painful process of confronting historical truth, and even more shocking than his wartime betrayal would prove to be the final chapter of Morrison's story. The full extent of James Morrison's betrayal had been uncovered by Dr. Reynolds, she thought, when she received an encrypted email from an anonymous source in January 2023. A single line was contained in the message: Morrison didn't die in 1944. Check the nursing home records in Phoenix, Arizona, 1987 to 1995. The tip seemed impossible. By 1987, Morrison would have been nearly 80 years old, and no evidence existed that he had survived the war, let alone lived in the United States under an assumed identity for decades after his supposed death. But in an investigation that had already shattered so many assumptions about historical truth, any lead had been learned by Dr. Reynolds not to dismiss. With a private investigator specializing in genealogical research, she began examining nursing home records throughout the Phoenix metropolitan area until the records of Sunset Manor Care Facility were discovered by them, where a patient named James Morris had resided from 1987 until his death in 1995. The search seemed hopeless. Perfectly matched Morrison were the physical description, birth year, and personal details, but conclusive proof of identity was provided by the patient's medical records, identical to injuries Morrison had reported after a training accident in 1942, were distinctive scars on his left arm and shoulder that James Morris had. More significantly, on Morrison's personal effects discovered by his great-grandson, his fingerprints taken during routine medical procedures matched prints found. For nearly 50 years after his supposed death, America's most notorious traitor pilot had been living quietly in Arizona, maintaining his cover identity while collecting Social Security benefits and veterans' disability payments under the false identity of James Morris. But even more disturbing questions about who had facilitated his return to the United States and why were raised by Morrison's presence in an Arizona nursing home. A network of former intelligence operatives who had helped Nazi war criminals and American traitors establish new identities and integrate into American society was revealed by the investigation into his post-war life by a trust fund administered by a law firm in Phoenix that specialized in representing clients with complex international backgrounds. The nursing home records showed that Morrison's care had been paid for, that Morrison's trust had been established in 1962 with funding that could be traced to Swiss bank accounts. previously used by Nazi intelligence operations, was revealed by the firm's records, subpoenaed by federal investigators. More significantly, that Morrison had not been living in isolation was shown by the records, from individuals whose backgrounds suggested ongoing connections to intelligence activities. He had received regular visits. Former CIA operatives who had worked on Operation Paperclip, retired military officers with ties to classified aerospace programs, and several individuals who had been subjects of FBI counterintelligence investigations during the 1970s and 1980s were included in these visitors. That Morrison had remained an active intelligence asset throughout his supposed retirement, possibly providing consultation services to whoever was willing to pay for his unique combination of aviation expertise and intelligence experience, was suggested by the pattern. But from Morrison's personal effects, which had been preserved by the nursing home after his death in 1995, came the most shocking discovery: a detailed diary covering the period from 1962 to 1994, written in a mixture of English, German, and what appeared to be a sophisticated cipher code, was among his possessions. That Morrison had continued his intelligence activities well into the 1990s, serving as a consultant on projects involving aerospace technology, satellite surveillance, and military communication systems, was revealed by the portions of the diary that could be decoded. Defense contractors, foreign governments, and private intelligence firms whose activities operated in the gray areas between legitimate business and espionage had been included in his clients. Unrepentant about his wartime betrayal, viewing his actions as part of a larger ideological commitment that transcended national loyalties, had remained Morrison, as shown by the diary entries. The concept of patriotism is a tool used by governments to manipulate their populations. He had written in 1985, "I have always served the highest bidder, because that is the most honest form of loyalty in a world built on deception." But a growing paranoia about being discovered was revealed by Morrison's final entries, written in the months before his death. That intelligence agencies were closing in on his true identity. He had become convinced, and preparations to destroy evidence of his activities had been begun by him. "They are asking too many questions about the old operations," he wrote in November 1994. "The young investigators don't understand the complexities of the post-war period. They see everything in black and white, good and evil. If they discover the truth about the arrangements that were made, it will destroy more than just my reputation." The most revealing was Morrison's final entry, dated March 15, 1995, just 2 weeks before his death. "Why have arranged for certain documents to be distributed if anything happens to me? The people who protected me for 50 years need to understand that their secrets are not safe if I am threatened. We all have too much to lose for anyone to betray the arrangement." That Morrison's death in 1995 might not have been from natural causes, as the death certificate claimed, was now realized by Dr. Reynolds. If he had been threatening to expose the network that had protected him for decades, too dangerous to be allowed to live might have been decided. He had become by his former handlers. Suspicious circumstances that had been overlooked at the time were revealed by the investigation into Morrison's death. A heart attack was listed as what he had died suddenly of, but in good health just days before his death had been shown by medical records that he had been. More significantly, within hours of his death, before family members or authorities could examine them, his room had been thoroughly cleaned and all personal possessions removed. But through evidence he had never intended to leave behind, Morrison's final deception was about to be revealed. Through the most unexpected source came to light the truth about James Morrison's final years a digital photograph enhancement of the original 1944 image that had started Dr. Reynolds's investigation. Details from the photograph that had been invisible even to the most advanced enhancement technique available just months earlier were able to be extracted by researchers using artificial intelligence technology developed in 2023. That Morrison's flight jacket contained a hidden pocket with documents that were far more detailed than the German coordinates Dr. Reynolds had initially discovered was revealed by the new analysis. What appeared to be a complete intelligence dossier, including photographs of American military personnel, technical specifications of Allied aircraft, and most disturbing of all, a list of names that included other American pilots suspected of collaborating with German intelligence, was shown by the enhanced images. 17 names were contained in the list, including several pilots who had been celebrated as war heroes and had gone on to distinguished post-war careers in the military and aerospace industry. A pattern of suspicious activities that suggested Morrison had been part of a much larger network of American military personnel who had been compromised by German intelligence was revealed by Cross, referencing these names with post-war intelligence files. But from the final name on the list came the most shocking revelation. Kevin Morrison's grandfather, James Morrison Jr., who had served as a Navy pilot in the Pacific Theater, that his son had been recruited to provide intelligence about American naval operations against Japan, was suggested by the documents. That Morrison's betrayal had been a family affair. That his family's betrayal of America had extended across multiple generations and theaters of war was the devastating realization faced by Kevin Morrison. To the Germans, his great-grandfather had betrayed Allied airmen, while to the Japanese, his grandfather had apparently provided intelligence that had cost American naval personnel their lives. That he had been responsible for the loss of at least 2 American aircraft carriers in the Pacific, providing the Japanese with detailed intelligence about American fleet movements and defensive capabilities, was revealed by the investigation into James Morrison Jr.'s activities. Some of the most devastating American naval losses of the war, including the sinking of the USS Hornet and the heavy casualties suffered during the Battle of the Philippine Sea, had been contributed to by his actions. But that both Morrisons had survived the war and had maintained their collaboration with foreign intelligence services throughout the Cold War was perhaps the most disturbing discovery. As a family intelligence dynasty, father and son had operated, selling American military secrets to whoever was willing to pay the highest price. That their activities had compromised American military operations from World War II through the Gulf War, spanning nearly 50 years of systematic betrayal that had cost thousands of American lives and undermined American strategic interests around the world, was suggested by the evidence. In December 2023, Dr. Reynolds's investigation culminated in a classified briefing to senior Pentagon officials, where evidence that American military history contained far more instances of betrayal and collaboration than had ever been suspected, was presented by her. A shadow world of loyalty for sale and patriotism corrupted by ideology and greed had been opened a window into by the Morrison case. Swift and comprehensive was the Pentagon's response. To review the combat records and post-war activities of all highly decorated World War II veterans. Looking for patterns similar to those found in the Morrison case, a joint task force was established. Whether similar networks of compromised personnel had operated during those conflicts, the investigation expanded to include Korean War and Vietnam War veterans, but far beyond military history extended the human cost of the Morrison investigation. A national conversation about the nature of heroism and the reliability of historical narratives had been triggered by Kevin Morrison's decision to expose his family's betrayal. Investigations into their ancestors' service records were demanded by families of other World War II veterans, fearing that their own family heroes might have harbored similar dark secrets of how new technology could reveal historical truths that had been hidden for decades. The enhanced photograph that had started the investigation became a symbol, using advanced digital analysis to search for evidence of other deceptions and betrayals. Museums around the world began re-examining their collections of wartime photographs. But that historical truth is never fixed or final was perhaps the most significant legacy of the Morrison case, the recognition. Armed with new tools and fresh perspectives, each new generation of investigators has the potential to uncover secrets that previous generations had missed or deliberately concealed. A sobering assessment was concluded with by Dr. Reynolds's final report. The Morrison case demonstrates that our understanding of history is only as reliable as our ability to question accepted narratives and examine evidence with new eyes. The heroes we celebrate today may be revealed as villains tomorrow, and the villains we condemn may prove to have been more complex than we understood. For nearly 80 years, James Morrison's 1944 photograph had seemed ordinary. Of an American fighter pilot posing beside his aircraft, just another image. But the disturbing detail that exposed one of the most extensive betrayals in American military history had been revealed by advanced digital enhancement. German radio equipment and intelligence documents had been what the young pilot, who had smiled confidently at the camera in 1944, had been hiding more than. A betrayal that would span generations and cost thousands of American lives, all while maintaining the facade of heroism that had protected him for nearly 5 decades, had been what he had been concealing. An extraordinary deception had been revealed by the ordinary photograph, proving that sometimes the most dangerous enemies are those who smile while they wear the uniform of friendship. That we must constantly question the narratives we accept about our heroes and our history is shown to us by this incredible story of betrayal, deception, and the power of new technology to reveal historical truth. Please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. If this investigation into one man's lifetime of treachery moved you, do you think there are other historical photographs hiding similar dark secrets? With modern technology, what other mysteries from our past should we investigate? Remember, about the people we thought we knew, sometimes the most ordinary images contain the most extraordinary revelations.